we have worked on identifying the variables and their types and subtypes. And so now the next step is going to be to visualize the data that corresponds to those variables. And the whole reason we had to get through the types is that it actually turns out that the type of visualization, chart, graph, etc., that we produce for those variables depends on the variable type. Okay, so what we're going to do, and in general, when you are looking at the data, you kind of want to follow 3 steps. Okay, first, well, get the data. Okay, so this data is linked in the notes and it's also available on the schedule. Okay, it looks something like this. Okay, so this is survey data that you all provided at the beginning of the course. Okay, we'll be working with that. And then what we want to do next is what we call univariate analysis. You want to examine each variable by itself. And so this is like thinking through the variable type and then kind of envisioning what kind of chart or graph you would produce for it. And then later when we get into chapter 2, if we're working with quantitative variables, we can, do the math. So we can get numerical summaries and talk about a distribution. More on distributions later on. Okay. And then consequently, once we've done all that, then we can come to this other chart and say, okay, well, we talked about, categorical and quantitative variables, and here are the different graphs or charts that we can create. We can do a bar or pie chart for categorical variables, or for a single categorical variable. And then when it comes to quantitative variables, we can do histograms, time plots, dot plots, stem and leaf plots. We're only going to focus on the first two and primarily the histogram. Okay. And when we get into two variables, then things change. That's called bivariate analysis, and so that's where we start to look at relationships among the variables. Okay, but for now, let's take a look at our example file. Okay, and if you've never worked in Excel before, you need to learn how to work in Excel. Okay, come to Just Ask or watch tutorial videos, but you need to be proficient in Excel. Okay, so what I want to do first is kind of make a new row, and kind of come up here, and I'll probably make a new column too, just for fun. And I'm going to call this the variable type column, or variable type row rather. Okay, and so now I want to kind of go through each one of these questions and say, okay, what's the variable that we have data on in each of these? And consequently, its type. Okay, so maybe I'll say variable and type. Okay, and I'm just going to do this for my own reference, and I'm going to start a few and then kind of let you finish it on your own. Okay, so in this first one, if I look at the question, you can see it's up here. What is your height in inches rounded to the nearest inch? Well, okay, what's the variable? What's the variable? It's height. Okay, and height is going to be a quantitative continuous variable. Okay. Yes, now here's the whole reason why your book doesn't go any further into subtypes with quantitative. Okay. Notice that the data that we have gathered is rounded to the nearest inch. It is whole numbers, right? So you might say it is quantitative discrete. Well, okay, here's the fundamental problem. Yes, the data as presented is quantitative discrete. However, height as an overall variable can be anything from 0 to, well, something like 9 feet, right? And then whatever that is in inches, 108. So it exists on that range, and you can be, a partial of an inch tall. So that's why I prefer the label of quantitative continuous, even though our data looks discrete. Okay, so so if you say it's just quantitative and be consistent with the textbook, that's fine. Okay. Next one is how much did you spend on your last haircut? And here this is, so this is cost of a haircut, okay, of a haircut, and this is quantitative continuous again. You could make an argument for discrete, and I'm okay with that here too. Okay, so if you just want to label it as quantitative to avoid that discrepancy, that's fine. Next variable. Now this is an interesting one. Did you work for pay during your last year of school? Okay, so this is work status maybe, or maybe you want to give it a different name, but this, even though it's represented as ones and zeros, it is not quantitative. It is categorical, okay? And there is a yes and no option. 1 represents yes, 0 represents no, okay? But do those have a natural order? Do you automatically say yes before no, or vice versa? Well, not really, so it's categorical nominal, okay? But now, okay, I'll let you finish all this, okay? But the next thing that I want to do is just kind of come down here and say, okay, well, if I were to make a chart, what kind of chart would I make? Okay, again, with height being a quantitative continuous or just quantitative variable, I would probably make a histogram. And if you don't know what these are, we'll introduce them. Cost of a haircut, again, I would probably do a histogram. You could consider a dot plot, but we're not going to do those in this class. Work status, since it is a binary yes or no, and we have the population, I would say probably a pie chart. A bar chart would be okay too, bar chart. And so you can go through, and I encourage you to work through this file and say, okay, well, what's the variable? What's the corresponding chart? What's the variable? What's the corresponding chart? Okay. And that way, you kind of get practice with, this flow chart and at least have identified which chart you should make. Now, in the later videos, is you have the task of making the chart.